Good evening, everyone. I'm Paolo Brunello. I'm a third-year part-time distance-based PhD student in ICT for development. I'm only halfway through my studies, so be warned, what I'm about to say might be only halfway through. Let's see. PhD. Everybody knows what this stands for, right? Philosophy doctor. Yeah, I say that the P stands for passion. You better have a passion if you want to start a PhD. Not that it is impossible to get passionate along the way, but I think starting with a passion about your research topic greatly helps. H stands for hassle. You have to have something that hassles you, that makes you think, yeah, I want to pin this down, really understand what it is and tell everyone. It's like sleeping with breadcrumbs in your bed, and chances are that the more you go on studying, the bigger the breadcrumbs will be. D stands for devotion. Think each sentence of your thesis is like one of these pieces of a big domino rally. Hours and hours putting them carefully one after the other for a show that will only last 3 hours in the Viva exam. You hit the first block and done. The show unfolds. But don't forget to do some exercise along the way. Don't use your body simply as a mean to carry around your head. Mens sana in corpore sano. I think this guy is the best PhD student. Hang on there, be self-confident, but don't forget to party. And if you have devotion, perseverance, patience, and faith enough, and you are also lucky, you might get to the point of being ordained doctor, or knighted, or initiated. The point is, a PhD is also an initiation ritual to make sure you comply with the minimal requirements of academia. You are deserving the membership to this exclusive club of scholars. So, indeed, a PhD goal is to add your brick to the glorious building of human knowledge, but do not forget that every behavior has a social part to it, and this is often the most important one. So science is a discourse occurring among a community of people that call themselves scientists, and they share a culture, and most likely a PhD is our first utterance in that discourse. We would be lucky if someone would turn and listen and possibly even ask questions. So at the end of the day, the goal is to keep nourishing the debate, to keep the discourse alive and interesting. Now, how does this principle translate in my PhD? In other words, how do I answer the 3 key questions of any research, in my view? The what, the how, and the so what? Well, before getting into the what, let me ask, how many of you have been to Africa? Well, anyone who has been to Burundi? That's where I studied, and I worked for 5 years in ICT for education, setting up computer labs in high schools and training the local teacher to become able to administer this infrastructure. The last project I managed was in 2009 with an European bilateral cooperation agency, and while doing this, I really realized I was in a privileged position, being an insider, to look at the nexus, the interplay between aid practices, education, and technology. The key question number one is, why are information communication technology for education projects so fragile, as the literature reports? Why is it so hard to maintain such infrastructures alive over time? Why sustainability is such a chimera, hard to grasp? And the second question, deriving from this first one, is, what is the role play how are the different stakeholders negotiating their identities, their goals, their tactics to get to these goals? Because I think besides the maintenance, the technical problems, there's always a social problem. And as Goffman would say, we are always on stage negotiating our identities. When you get to a project as an expatriate outsider in a developing country, you're basically stepping on a stage where someone throws a coat and a funny hat without you realizing it, and people look at you and interact with you having some expectations that are coming from the history of this show that has been going on for decades before your arrival. It takes time to get used to this and understand it and master it. Now, what is the role of technology in such a role play? Both instrumentally, meaning what do you do with technology, but also symbolically, what does technology stands for in terms of status and power? Are we really sure that bringing technologies to developing country means to emancipate, let these people emancipate themselves through technology, or instead technology can serve to reinforce or even amplify the power asymmetry that were there before, so that at the end of the day we are all high-tech, more sophisticated and technological, but I'm still the boss and you are still the executor. Now, how do I go about all this? How do I search that? Well, first I was concerned about the multiplicity of roles that I was covering, because I was at the same time the project manager, the information system designer, having to choose which operating system, what software to install. I was also the system administration trainer, so making sure that the local Burundian teacher would learn how to maintain functional infrastructure. And on top of all that, I was also a researcher. So with my supervisor, Tim Unwin, we decided to come up with a new method called ethnographic snapshot, a set of 38 questions that I had come up with that were relevant and that I would answer over and over every 6 weeks, so that at the end I could track down how my perception evolved over time. But I need also something to tackle complexity more directly, because ICT for education projects in technologically poor countries is inherently complex, since it is intercultural. You have Europeans with their mentalities, you have Africans with their mentalities. It's also transdisciplinary, because you have teachers, you have techies, you have administrative staff in the school with different backgrounds, you have the management of the development agency with different backgrounds, and then it's also socio-technical, meaning that technology has this power of changing the social practices. So in order to grasp all that, we need to zoom out and look things from up above, trying to connect the dots. And I found that NetMap was the right method to do that. How does NetMap work? Well, before going to that, let me first spend a minute focusing the attention on the advantages of a map. A map is a simplified version of reality. It's teleologic, meaning that it gets rid of what's not coherent with my goals. Everything that is not necessary is not in the map, like in the tube map in London. It's also versatile, because you can use a map to orientate yourself towards the north and know which direction to take, but also to measure distances, so qualitatively and quantitatively. A map is a common reference. Everybody knows that north is up in the map. So this allows for coordinated action. So a map is empowering. And a map makes the invisible visible. We cannot see temperature, but with a map. And relationships is the same. They have no physical counterpart. They have no matter, but they do matter. With a map, we can grasp them. And then this allows us to make sense of what's happening. And when I say make sense, I really think about a craftsman that fabricates something. That's the meaning we construct with our action. Once you have a map, new dimensions that were not there before become visible. If you look at this image, you can see a 3D object coming up if you know the technique to look at the stereogram. This third dimension was not there before, but if you look at that and you consider that, your behavior will change, and that can be called learning. So how does this translate into NetMap? NetMap has a 4-step process where first your stakeholders are asked to identify themselves by using these little figurines and some post-its. Then you ask them to draw the links in terms of money flow, in terms of command, who has the right to order something to someone else, who is training whom. Once you've done that, you ask them to assess what is the relative influence of each actor by putting some discs underneath each actor figurine. And lastly, you ask the stakeholders to define what are the priorities of each actor. And not just the official priorities, but try to unearth also the hidden agenda. Especially for those who are in power, every new initiative is to a certain extent a threat to their position. So as a researcher, it is very important to try to legitimize these fears and turning them into acceptable goals to have a more open discussion. So this is how it looks in reality. See, the first phase, the identification of the actors, then the drawing of the links, the assessment of the relative influence, the higher the tower, the higher the influence, and then the map. Since we had a lot of people, we did 3 groups, and then we compare the maps, and then from this discussion and comparison, very nice and interesting, insightful information came about, because the maps were different. So it's a really rich method for facilitating a group. But then if you are a researcher, you can turn the map from paper to the computer using this software called Visualizer, and you can see the bubble here are proportional to the height of the influence tower. This is still complicated, you may say, so it is possible to ask the software to highlight only a layer that I'm interested in, for example hierarchy, and see the structure of the network, and then focus on another layer by hiding the rest, like in this case training, who is training whom. And by comparing these different layers, we can understand better how the interaction works in the system. Now, the key question here is, so what? Why bother? But also, so what are your findings so far? Well, I do believe that bringing access to technology and the internet is a way of bringing global citizenship in the information society. So by understanding better how to make this effective, we are basically giving a voice to people that are otherwise marginalized. And this is very important, because the more voices we have, the more critics we have. And the more critics we have, the more alternatives we can produce. And I think these alternatives are very much needed in these days, because this is what I think happens, what is the attitude of developed countries right now. They look at the mirror and they feel like, how sporty and fit and smart I am. Instead, we are overdeveloped. We are obese country if you look at the ecological footprint, which is the quantity of earth resources needed to sustain our current living standards. This is not sustainable. We are basically shooting on our foot by consuming, by destroying our own life support system, and that's not clever. So in order to challenge this mentality, I don't think we can do it from inside, because we are too embedded into the system and we are used to this way of living. Only people coming from a very different cultural background and having a different relationship in nature can really radically challenge this model of development. And giving voice to them, it's a way to nourish the debate and let the mainstream being challenged more. In terms of findings, well, I'm, as I said at the very beginning of my thesis, so I have collected the data, but I still haven't started to analyze them in detail, so hold on, and next year I will tell you what I found. Thank you for your attention.